Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was finally forced to admit that former President Donald Trump lied about the 2020 presidential election.
Yes or no, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Whoever puts their hand on the Bible on January 20th every 4 years is the winner.
Okay, but respectfully, you did not clearly answer that question. And if you can't give a yes or no on whether or not Trump lost, then how
well,
can...
Of course he lost.
Trump lost the 2020 election.
Of course.
Okay.
Joe Biden's the president.
And there it is.
Oh my God, he admitted.
Okay, look, obviously there was a little bit of a forceful extraction on that one. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, fine, I admit it. I admit it. Now, look, this is actually pretty important because, look, not only does it mean he was admitting reality, which is an objective reality, but he's also admitting indirectly, albeit, that the indictments against Donald Trump for trying to overturn the election are legitimate. And how do I say that? Again, he says it without actually having to say it. And without even meaning to say it, honestly, the entire foundation of Donald Trump's attempts to seize power after the election that he had lost legitimately was the fact that he believed that, or, well, he said that the election was illegitimate, that it was fraudulent, even though he knew that it wasn't. He knew that it absolutely was a legitimate election. Again, there were the claims of voter fraud, election fraud. It's the poll workers, the deep state. The deep state has tried to shut me down. None of that, of course, is true. And whether or not Ron DeSantis realizes it, he just said that 2020 was a legitimate election. That said, of course, since Ron DeSantis is a Republican, he had to go in and put a caveat, a couple of caveats on it.
But the issue is, I think what people in the media and elsewhere, they want to act like somehow this was just like the perfect election.
He added, I don't think it was a good run election, but I think Republicans didn't fight back. You've got to fight back when that is happening. Fight back against mainly more people voting, specifically certain kinds of people, like black people. All right, so let me give you a read on what DeSantis is doing, okay? So what he's trying to do on this is, first of all, accept reality. All right. For a reason, for a purpose. He's trying to take the Republican Party back to the time before Trump on the issue of voter fraud. What do I mean by that? Well, before Trump, they would have vague accusations of, oh, illegal voters coming across the border voting for Democrats. So that's why we have to tighten up immigration. And that's why we have to tighten up voter laws. And of course, that's what they would do. They would use that as basically excuses to do stuff that they already wanted to do. Again, immigration, because they don't like immigrants. And also voter suppression, because they don't like black people voting. And of course, they're also doing gerrymandering in their districts, removing polling places in minority districts, doing voter purges of course, mainly black people, African Americans. And that's what they've been using to try to prevent the opposition from getting enough votes to get into power. Okay, and it's worked. It's worked quite a bit. But of course, you have demographics that are continuing to change, the country getting more diverse, et cetera, and they're having more difficulties. So now, that said, Trump comes in, he blows it all up, and then starts immediately saying, no, you don't understand. It is, I have 100% voter fraud. It was Joe Biden. It was this election worker. And so he's blaming his loss directly on, again, voter fraud, election fraud, etc., and then went a step further and used that to try to justify stealing an election. So obviously that freaked out a lot of Republicans who were like, no, we're just trying to use that in order to pass our draconian laws that do help us in our elections. Now, dummy, stupid, you went and messed it up.
You idiot.
You messed it up for all of us. And now you did something illegal, and now it makes us all look like criminals. So again, Ron DeSantis is part of that old school, club mentality, whatever. You can see, in the policies that he was trying to, shut down immigration, of course. And so he's part of that group. And he's like, even seeing that, what Donald Trump has basically gotten the base to believe, and then taking it too far is a really, really, really stupid strategy. And so he talks about mail-in ballots, which again used to not be an issue on the Republican side. Look, in Florida, by the way, anyone who wanted to vote by mail could do so. It hasn't been an issue. And that included in the 2020 election. Now, he then went on, of course, to tie this issue to COVID, Fauci, and blame Trump for funding the increase of use of mail-in ballots. He said, why did we have all of these mail-in votes anyway? Because Trump turned the government over to Fauci. He also said, he also addressed January 6th.
If, on the other hand, the election is not about January 20th, 2025, but January 6th, 2021, or what document was left by the toilet at Mar-a-Lago, if it's a referendum on that, we are going to lose.
100% correct on that. Yes, turns out if the election is about, who's flushing what, down the White House toilet.
People are flushing toilets 10 times, 15 times.
Then, Donald Trump is absolutely going to lose. So now the problem, of course, here is that, yes, DeSantis is right. Okay, what's the problem there? It turns out that for the Republican Party, that's not good to go and actually admit things that are true. And, by the way, also to not focus on what Trump has made the central issue for himself, mainly, and, of course, something that his voters have also made the central issue, which is Donald Trump lost. He didn't lose. He got it stolen. Voter fraud. Now, the thing is, when it comes to Republicans, that's a major issue, right? And I'll show you polling on that. But first, everyone else does not agree. The economy. Most important issue. Following that, healthcare. Then you got immigration, policing, crime, the environment, abortion, government spending, housing, education, national security, taxes, drugs, health, polarization. Down at 7%. Election integrity and voter fraud. Oops. Doesn't seem to be like a very big issue for the average voter. However, the problem is you've got to, as a Republican, go through a Republican primary in order to get to a general election. And, well, in order to get through a Republican primary, you have to be crazy. Among Republican voters, a full 56% say that they would prefer the nominee be closest to them on the issues compared to 39% who prioritize beating the opposition. So basically, you must be sufficiently right-wing in order to even win the primary, which, of course, in this country means you have to be unpalatable to the vast majority of Americans. Again, Trump, who is running on "they stole the election from me," is very likely to become the Republican nominee. There's no one really that's even close among Republican primary voters. And by the way, even though Biden has, he's got some very high disapproval ratings, we may have a situation where the vast majority of people are going to be turned off by Trump if he runs a campaign based on whining about 2020, about the election specifically. And I want to show you one relevant note here, by the way. I promised you the polling early on this. This is according to Pew Research Center. Republicans who relied heavily on Trump and his campaign for news were significantly more concerned than other Republicans about the possibility of election fraud heading into the election and more convinced that it had actually occurred in the weeks that followed. So that there's a major problem with mail-in voting specifically. So I don't see any evidence that this has changed at all over the past few years. And so what DeSantis is doing is that he is basically trying to run a general election campaign against Joe Biden without addressing Donald Trump and without addressing Republican voters that he needs to win a primary. Now, the base is so radicalized, and this is why Ron DeSantis is polling so poorly now, is because, again, they're radicalized. They believe so fervently in the big lie. And so anyone who doesn't parrot that line is never going to make it past a Republican primary into a general election, unless now somehow the Ron DeSantis reboot, which again still involves, I'm going to focus on the woke, which is another issue that's not very popular with the average person. The only thing that they're really counting on at this point now is that somehow Donald Trump himself gets barred from running.